Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It has actually been a while since I've done a proper sit down video. I actually think it's been around 4 months and it's been a very long time since I've done a reading wrap up. So far this year I have only read 10 books. 2 of them are DNFs. I will say I'm having not a bad reading year because all of the books other than those 2 DNFs I've actually really enjoyed, but it's a lot slower this year and I'm not really too sure why, because I feel like I have a lot more free time than I usually do. I only have 2 DNFs I'm going to briefly talk about because I don't think it's really worth me giving a review on 2 books that I didn't even finish. But yeah, I think we should get straight into it. First book I wanted to talk about is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This book was a really anticipated release and I just never got around to reading it, and I have no idea why. I literally have no idea why. This was the first book I read in January. So for those who don't know, this book follows our main character June Hayward, who's sort of this very mediocre, unsuccessful writer. June actually witnesses the death of, I'm going to use this term very loosely, witnesses the death of her best friend Athena Liu. Athena Liu is a Chinese American author who is very beloved in the publishing world. She's a best-selling author and she's sort of June Hayward's rival. On the night of Athena's death, she actually tells Athena about her newest project and shows her the manuscript. And then after her death, June decides she is going to publish Athena's manuscript under her own name. This book is so topical right now just because of what is actually happening in the publishing world. If you're on Threads, which is Instagram's new Twitter, I don't know, you'll know a lot about this book and about why people think it's so topical right now. I'm not going to talk about it, but I really love this book. I don't know how to describe it. It was really interesting to be in the mind of someone so despicable, but also what I found really funny, the way R.F. Kuang depicted Athena was also extremely interesting. She didn't sort of make Athena this sort of angel character, I don't know, this good character. She sort of also made her just a little bit less despicable than June, I would say, but also just they're both pretty despicable. But I found this book just so interesting. I will say one of my tips, if you do want to read this book, read it if you want to, but listen to the audiobook. The audiobook is so well done. It is actually amazing. I think this is a book that's meant to be spoken, not read. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I think it's going to be one of my favorite books I've read this year, at least in the top 5, I believe. Yeah, if you have not read this book, I highly recommend it. In my last wrap-up video, I talked about Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and this year the sequel came out. I haven't really heard what other people think about it, but I did enjoy this and I thought it wrapped up really nicely, but I don't know why. I just found it a bit underwhelming compared to Divine Rivals. Divine Rivals just completely took my breath away. I absolutely loved the book. I loved the characters. I loved the romance. I loved everything about it. This book, I felt had all of that, obviously, but I do think it suffered from a bit of lack of world building, and I also think that is probably a problem with both of the books in the duology. But I still really like this book, but I'll probably only give it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I wanted to talk about is probably my most anticipated read of 2024, and it was A House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This book is massive. It could have easily been, I'm gonna say, could have easily been maybe this much. We did need the end, but we didn't need some of the stuff in between. This book was huge.
She's a mammoth, of course.
And honestly a bit overwhelming. But I read it the day it came out. I finished it, I think, in 3 days. This book was sort of like a marathon. The start started amazingly. It died down a bit. you got some weird POVs from characters you didn't really want POVs from, and then you climbed back up, and then you had a bit of a downfall with the main character of this book, Bryce. But then I slowly came back up, and then I just plateaued to the finish line. That was my marathon adventure anyway with this book. I can't really talk about much about it because it's the last book in the series. I will say Nesta and Azriel were the best characters in this book, and they were only there for, I'm gonna say, like 5 chapters, which I sort of knew going in. I think a lot of people were expecting the ACOTAR characters to play a huge role in this book, but usually when this happens between other series, the crossover doesn't last very long, just in my experience. The reason the ACOTAR characters weren't in it for as long is because I think publishers don't want to tell readers that in order to read this book, you have to read 2 other book series in order to read the Crescent City series. I don't think publishers actually really like doing that, which is weird because you'd think they'd want them. You'd want people to read certain books, all the books, but I digress. The first Crescent City book was amazing. The second book, problems started to arise, but the characters were really good. That kept me engaged. This book, I just felt like the plot holes that were left, and I know there's going to be more books, I just felt like there were things that needed to be discussed that were never discussed. I also just felt like there were certain characters, I don't want to spoil it too much, but there were certain characters that were fighting about things that should have been fought about in book 2, not necessarily in the last book when your lives are literally on the line. I am excited to how Sarah J Maas is going to do the ACOTAR books after this. I'm just curious to know what the plot is going to be like. But yeah, I was a bit underwhelmed by this. This is going to be controversial, but I have said this, I don't know if I've said it on YouTube, but I personally do not like how Sarah J Maas ends series. I think she does a bit of a rush job with the ending, and that's just my personal opinion. I'm not a huge Sarah J Maas fan. I do enjoy her series, but yeah, I feel like I am her biggest critic as well, if that makes sense. I rated this book, I'm gonna say 3 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not my favorite Sarah J Maas book. It was still good. It wrapped up the plot, I guess. I feel like I should do a ranking video on all of the Sarah J Maas books, but that means I would have to reread them all, and that is a daunting task. That's a scary task, to be honest. The next book I wanted to talk about is a book that literally has ticked all of my boxes, and that is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. If your favorite movie is The Mummy, you are going to freaking love What the River Knows. I can't even express it enough. This book follows Inez, whose parents are archaeologists in Egypt. They have unfortunately passed away for unknown circumstances, and Inez actually goes off to see her uncle who was with them at the time to get some answers about their death. This book is so good in terms of world building, magic system, plot. The characters in this book are amazing. I absolutely loved the romance of this book. As a huge ancient history, ancient Egypt lover, I have been waiting for a book like this, and I need the second book. It is so good. I can't express it enough. Every single page was fun. It was honestly, overall, it was just such a fun and engaging read, and I have not read a book that has done this to me in a really long time. So I was really happy about this book as someone who loves the movie The Mummy, loves ancient Egypt, loves a bit of rivals to lovers, enemies to lovers. I just love this book. It was so good. I need the second book so bad, but apparently it's not coming out until 2025. The next book I wanted to talk about is actually my first DNF of 2024, and that was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I personally love Ali Hazelwood's books. I loved The Love Hypothesis, I loved Love on the Brain. I haven't read her others since then, but I was really excited for this, just for something to see something different from her, and I sort of went into it blind. I knew it was a paranormal romance. I didn't know it was a bit of like an Omegaverse situation going on, which shocked me, to be honest. I was surprised to see this in a published book and not a fan fiction. Basically, this book follows like it's sort of an arranged marriage situation between a vampire and a werewolf. They're sort of like the werewolf is like the leader of the pack. He's like the alpha. And the vampire is just she's basically just a vampire, that's all she is, whose dad is like the main vampire, I'm guessing. To be honest, I didn't hate it. I did not hate it. It's just not what I wanted, and I only got about halfway into it. I will say it is very well written, and I did enjoy the characters. I personally just felt, which I think why a lot of people don't like Ali Hazelwood's books, is that it's just very tropey, and sometimes that's what you want, but I did not want that, and I don't know what I wanted. I think because when I usually read fantasy books, they're a bit more, or paranormal romance, there's a bit more world building behind it. This one just, I mean, it's a romance book, I think it's a romance before it's a paranormal book, if that makes sense. So I understood it, but yeah, I think I might go back and revisit this maybe one day, but it just didn't interest me at the time that I read it. Yeah, I read it straight after What the River Knows, just to keep me in the reading momentum, and it just didn't, and so I DNF'd it and went and grabbed something else. The next book I read was Hopeless by Elise Silver. I went into this thinking this is the first book in this series, but it's actually the last. So I was quite confused reading this. I didn't really know any of the characters, and then I realized, so ignore that. I did really enjoy this. It's sort of like a fake engagement plotline, fake dating plotline with a character called Beau, and what's the girl's name? I literally forgot. What's her name? Libby? Bailey. No, it's not. Yeah, Bailey. Beau and Bailey. Is it Bailey? I'm sorry, I promised I have read this book. Bailey. It is Bailey, okay. Follows them, they're in a fake engagement situation. He is sort of like classic grumpy sunshine. He's really grumpy, she's sort of like an outcast. They start dating each other to sort of up her social status in the town so she can get a job. I really liked this book, but I was confused the entire time reading it just because I didn't know who any of these characters were, which I should have just put it down, started reading the first book in the series. To be honest, I don't think because it's sort of what I think the books are. The cowboy romance books just aren't really for me, from what I'm gathering. So I don't really like small town romances, if that makes sense. I still did enjoy this book. I finished it, which is good. I just didn't love it. And so therefore I've rated it 5 out of 5 stars, 3 out of 5 stars. The next book is another book that I DNF'd. I did not make it to even chapter 4. No, I got up to chapter 5. Chapter 4 was like 2 pages, and then I stopped reading it. And that is Assistant to the Villain. I forgot the name. This book is by a creator on TikTok who has made a series about what if the main villain had an assistant. It's sort of like a romance book. I actually followed the series for a while. I enjoyed it. It was a bit like a sitcom, and so I was sort of excited. I was just more curious to what this book would be. I'm not saying I didn't like it, it's just I don't know if it was a mix of just because I think I just didn't want to waste time with it, in terms of like I already had read Bride, which I didn't like, so I just gave this book up before I even got into the main plotline of this story. I have heard very, very mixed reviews about it. That's all I'm going to say. I wasn't really taken away by what I read in those first 5 chapters, so I decided to put it down. But if you do like that plotline, maybe this is something for you. The next book I wanted to talk about is a memoir / non-fiction. It is one that I probably should have read way earlier. I should have read it when I've first saw it online, but I didn't. I instead waited. I bought it 6 years ago and just never picked it back up again, and it's been on my TBR ever since. I finally read Just Kids by Patti Smith. So Just Kids is a memoir by Patti Smith. It sort of takes us through her starting years as an artist and also delves into a bit of her relationship with the artist Robert Mapplethorpe. I think all in all this book is a love letter to any sort of artist ever. If you're ever trying to follow your dreams, this book is just an incredibly personal, beautiful and sad book. It was just so honest as well. I can't express how much I love this book. I just think it's such an important book to read in your early 20s. This book is 5 out of 5 stars. It is definitely going to be in my top 5 reads ever. It has opened so many doors for me to be able to read Patti Smith's other works as well. So the next book I wanted to talk about, I actually did a reading vlog on this, and that is the last Magnolia Parks book, Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. If you want to see a full-fledged video about this book, I recommend watching my reading vlog. I'll link it down below. I'm not going to talk too much about the plot of this because it is the last book in the series. If you have followed my channel for a while now, you'll know that I have been slowly getting through the Magnolia Parks books, and I'm finally at the end. Well, until she releases the next Daisy Hates books, but they're not happening anytime soon. So as of right now, I'm at the end. This book is probably one of my favorite Magnolia Parks books. One, because the characters just sorted their shit out. Magnolia and BJ I'm talking about, especially Magnolia, which I was very pleased about because I was not her biggest fan. This book was just such a good book if you are experiencing any sort of grief. The way Magnolia views it is very similar to how I sort of view grief in my past life. It was a great end to this series. One of the books that I've rated 5 out of 5 stars. Also the covers. I just can't get over the covers of these books. They're just so beautiful. The actual story was beautiful as well. If you have not read the Magnolia Parks series, I strongly recommend you do. I feel like I've said that about every book so far on this list, but if you have not read it, I definitely think you should. It is a roller coaster of emotions, and yeah, it's rough. It's a rough story, but it gets paid off. The last book I want to talk about is a book I actually finished yesterday or day before. Yesterday I finished it. What day is it today? No, sorry, I finished it on Saturday. I thought today was Sunday. And that is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. If you are new to my channel, I absolutely love Ava Reid. She's one of my favorite authors. So I was extremely excited to jump into this book. This book follows Effie, who is an architecture student. She wins this competition that is going to allow her to rebuild the house of one of her favorite authors who has just passed away. This competition was hosted by the family of this author. When she arrives to this beautiful crumbling manor that's literally about to sink, she meets a literature student at the same university she goes to, and this literature student is named Preston, and he is actually trying to uncover whether the actual author was this fraud. I will say this is not my favorite Ava Reid book. I think my favorite Ava Reid book is Juniper and Thorn, and followed by The Wolf and the Woodsman, but I still enjoyed this book. If there's one thing Ava Reid does right, it is creating an atmosphere. This book was really captured the vibe she was wanting to put out. Ava, I'm talking about. I love the way Ava Reid describes things. I do love her characters, but I don't know why in this book I didn't really fall in love with the characters as much as I did with her other books, but I still enjoyed this book. I do think if you are going to read it, please look up the trigger warnings. Ava Reid does deal heavily with sexual assault in Juniper and Thorn and A Study in Drowning, so be mindful of that before you dive into her books. But as for this one, I really love this book. I wasn't expecting the plot twist because I sort of got the vibe, and I kind of glad that she did this. I'm not going to go into it, but I got the vibe early on that the author wasn't as what he seems. I can't speak. This always happens at the end of the video. I always just lose my train of thought. I get a bit delirious. I've been filming for 2 hours, which is a long time, and my back is starting to hurt. Just FYI. I'm so excited to see what else she writes. Her next book, Lady Macbeth, sounds so interesting. I'm so excited to read it. I rated this book. I think I'm gonna still rate this book 4 out of 5 stars. I do think some of the world building was just unneeded. Like, I kind of felt like this didn't have to be set in a fantasy world. It could have easily been set, I don't know, in some other country. I don't know. But like, it didn't really have to be a fantasy. It could have easily just been a lit fic book, if that makes sense. But anyway, I still really enjoyed it. That was all of the 10 books I've read so far this year. Thank you so much for watching, if you still are watching, but if you're not, I understand. It was a long video. It's going to be a long video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you. Bye.